think our own Trey Anastasio. I know he's
Absolutely
probably interviewed him at some point. This morning we have the unique opportunity to watch this Rolling Stone contributing editor in action as he interviews Crystal Zevon about her book, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, The Dirty Life and Times of Warren Zevon, a book CBS has named Best Summer Reads, and the New York Times' Janet Maslin called one of the 10 best books of the year. It's like a 3D Rolling Stone article. We're very pleased you could make it this year. This is sort of this was going to happen last year, that was not able to happen, so we're really thrilled that you were able to come back and join us. Won't you join me in welcoming both Anthony DeCurtis and Crystal Zevon.
Thank you very much. Well, Crystal, you know, I was telling you, we were talking a little bit earlier about how affected I was reading this book. And I wanted to just kind of go back and you know, establish, you know, just kind of the beginnings of your relationship with Warren. You know, when did you meet him? What was he like? And you know, talk about the, you know, that time of your initial impressions of him and his of you.
Okay. It's funny because I haven't been doing this for a while, and as you asked that question, my mind went blank for a minute. I'll do my best. I was going out with Waddy Wachtel, the guitarist, and Warren was the band leader for the Everly Brothers at the time, and he hired Waddy to play with the Everly Brothers. So I went to the airport to pick Waddy up after a tour at one point, and he asked me to give Warren a ride. He was temporarily separated from the mother of his son, and so he was living at the Tropicana Motel, for any LA knowledgeables.
Yeah, hot spot, yeah, right,
famous
exactly.
rock and roll hotel back in those days. And motel, very clearly motel, not hotel.
This motel will be standing until I pay my bill.
That's right. Anyway, Warren got in the car. I was driving. I had a Chevy Super Sport van, and Waddy was sitting in the passenger seat rolling joints. And Warren and I had our eyes met in the rearview mirror, and something clicked. I mean, it was just, you know, it's one of those moments in time that you can't really describe, but we ran into each other 3 or 4 places after that, just by chance. We'd never run into each other before. You know, the only thing I'd known about him was Waddy singing me his songs. Carmelita was the first song of his I ever heard. And 3 weeks later, we were living together. So that was the 70s.
You know, I mean, he obviously in the songs, and you know, and in the persona that he struck, whether people saw him perform in clubs or in larger venues or on Letterman, you know, he wasn't necessarily the most kind of forthcoming person. Although obviously he had a big personality. What was it that was that part of his appeal, or was that something that you felt like you needed to draw him out a little bit, or how did that process go?
Oh, that's interesting. You know, I mean, the truth is, I remember looking at him a few times and saying, you know, he's not, you know, I mean, at the time, when I first met Warren, by the time he was publicly known, he had capped teeth and he'd had some work done here and there. Warren vanity was something he was actually proud of. So, but
his hair was perfect.
His hair was perfect. But at the time he had, you know, like little teeth with big spaces and, you know, kind of discolored, and, you know, he did not look, I kept looking at, of course, I was with Waddy, which Waddy's not the most attractive guy on the face of the earth either. But anyway, I kept thinking physically, you know, what is appealing to me about this guy? And I don't know that I can put my finger on it. There was and I think it's that same thing that people who got to know Warren, even when he could be abusive and offensive, and there was something about him that kept drawing you to him. I mean, he was the smartest guy I'd ever known. You know, I mean, I think that was probably a big part of it. Because I thought at the time I was in love with Waddy, but it happened very quickly, and I don't know, you know, it was just, we went home together, and that was that.
What about his music? You know, you mentioned, you know, Waddy playing Carmelita for you. You know, at what point did you, you know, start, you know, understanding just how gifted he was as a songwriter?
Well, I think I understood that from when Waddy played Carmelita over the phone when he was in England on tour, and it was pretty amazing. And you know, I mean, Waddy loved that song. If you listen to that song on the record, there's a guitar lick that Waddy does that's just, you know, sort of epitomizes the, you know.
Very beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway, when he came over to what happened was we met at the dentist's office, we ran into each other at the supermarket, and then there was this little club called Benny K's on Santa Monica Boulevard, just a little dive, where Waddy and a bunch of guys used to get together, and everybody got $10 a night, but they could play as loud as they want, as long as they want, and whatever they wanted. And so every Friday night, that was what we did. And Warren was not a part of that, but he came one Friday night, and you know, we did those manipulations where we made it so that we were sitting next to each other in the booth, and you know, then we're dancing on the floor, and then we're making out on the floor, and Waddy's in the band, you know. But he came home with me that night, and I had a piano. I always had a piano. I took piano lessons as a kid, and I just somehow always thought you had to have a piano wherever you lived. And he was writing. He was in the process of writing Desperados Under the Eaves, which, to my mind, is probably one of his finest songs. And so he sat down and, you know, started. First he played Frank and Jesse James, which was probably Warren's favorite song. And then he started playing that, you know, and playing with that song. And I was just, you know, I mean, I could have sat there for a lifetime listening to that. He actually, when he was finishing the song, there's a line that says, "I'm trying to find a girl who understands me." And he changed it to, "I finally found a girl who understands me," because we just met and so on. And then when they got into the studio to do it, everybody kept saying, "That doesn't work. It doesn't work with the song." So, you know, needless to say, I was disappointed. It went back to trying to find a girl.
You know, obviously, Warren at that point, you know, as you mentioned already, you know, had a son. He was, you know, good friends with your former boyfriend and a colleague, which was sort of, you know, maybe signal some of the beginning of some of the complexities of what your relationship was going to be like. And I was wondering if there was a moment when you realized, you know, I mean, obviously the beginning of a relationship, and particularly with somebody as compelling as Warren, you know, must have seemed just glorious. But if there was a moment when you felt like, wow, like we're not in Eden anymore, you know, this is a very different situation.
Yeah, when Warren and I moved in together, I had 2 foster children, I'd been their babysitter, and their mother committed suicide, and their father was a drunk, and it was, you know, it was the 60s, 70s, and I thought I was invincible, and so I took these kids in because they were going to go into an orphanage. And so it was, I mean, I suppose that's also something that, you know, people would not think of Warren as being someone who would move in with someone who had a 6- and 8-year-old child. You know, I was 21, and he did, you know, I mean, he very courageously moved in and sort of stepped into a role. But, you know, he was an alcoholic then, and I suppose, you know, there were times I had these really normal parents. You know, they both grew up in a small town in Kansas. They, you know, had been married forever. They never dated anyone else. They were, you know, sort of real salt of the earth kind of, you know, they could be an old Vermont couple. But and so I grew up with those values. And here I was with, this was
Mr. Bad Example.
Mr. Bad Example,
Yeah, right.
exactly. And I took him home. We got together in November, and I took him home at Christmas time.
Is this the incident where he bought your parents a very expensive bottle of scotch as a Christmas present?
Yes.
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, and exactly.
You can
And-
see the components are all setting up here.
And we got there, and he was ready for a drink, and nobody was drinking. And he suggested that we have a drink, so my father poured everyone a drink, and put it away. And they went to bed, and they got up the next morning, and there was nothing left in the bottle. So there were times then when there was a tug at who am I and what am I doing, and but the pull towards Warren and that life was much stronger. I mean, I had an old boyfriend of mine, Keith Olson, called one time, not knowing that I was going out with Warren. I mean, this was shortly after we got together, and I answered the phone, and I said right away, well, no, he was going to ask me out, and I said, no, I'm living with someone now, and I was very proud and pleased, and I hung up the phone, and Warren went into a rage that this boyfriend would have called, and why was I talking to him at all, and so on, and threw all the furniture out on the lawn, and that was our first big. And I said, oh my God. And I had 2 kids, remember, that were sleeping in the back bedrooms. So.
Yeah, the sense of that, quality of I don't know if it's anger, in Warren, was something that really surprised me reading your book. I mean, as I was saying, last year, for any of you who may have been here, you may remember this, but and when we were talking earlier, I was saying, I really went on a journey reading this book because, I started out, a very big Warren Zevon fan. I'd written about him a bit and met him several times, and I was always struck by him. And I'd known the stories about, he got drunk and, but like it's rock and roll, so, I never really thought badly of him for that. But then there were things in your book that really, for a time while reading the book, made me I just think, like, how could I ever have liked this person? And then by the end of the book, I feel like I traveled full circle. But to go back to that point of transition, there was drinking, obviously there was physical abuse, and of a particularly, I think, difficult sort. I mean, not that it's ever good, but like one time when he was going to appear on stage, Bruce Springsteen invited him on stage, and as he was hitting you, essentially said, you're not going to ruin my evening with Bruce, and it just, when I read that, it just made my skin crawl, and I was just wondering, what your picture of him was at those moments or afterwards, having, understanding him and knowing what a great artist and in many ways what a great person he was, but at the same time seeing him as somebody who was capable of doing that sort of thing to you.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that got cut from the book that I always regretted was a little more of his history. I mean, it's there a little bit in the beginning. He had this Jewish gangster father and a Mormon mother who had a congenital heart disease and a grandmother who always said, "You're going to kill your mother." So it was, the complexity of Warren and someone who had the IQ that he had growing up in this really strange environment, and it really was. I think had a lot to do with him, and once, of course, I knew that, and so there's some sort of what I didn't know a lot about at the time was alcoholism, but I was learning, and blackouts, and as for the afterward part, I finally came to realize that Warren was in a blackout in every one of those times. I mean, I knew it at the time that he wouldn't remember what had happened. The next morning, I would walk very softly. We would never refer to it, and just try to go on, because for me, I didn't want it to keep happening. By that time, we had our daughter, and you know, it was one of those situations where the good times were so good, and the bad times were so bad, that it just took time. Finally, when I felt like my daughter was threatened, you know, that's when I had to leave. I mean, it couldn't go on anymore. He got sober. He tried to stay sober, and when he couldn't, over a period of time, that's finally we left. But it took a long time. It was one of those things where Warren would do something hideous like that, and then the next day, he would have a song about me. And, you know, that's, you know, my own ego. You know, nobody will ever love me this much, you know, and it's that sort of hazed perception of what love is, you know, that in those days, you know, it was such a departure from my parents, who just got up and went to work every day and, you know, had dinner on the table, and this was, and, you know, I mean, I turned out to have a problem with alcohol also, which nobody, I mean, my drinking paled in comparison to
Yes,
his,
indeed,
so,
you're
you know, no one
within
thought of it
that
at the
context,
time.
yeah.
But I think, I don't know if I've answered the question.
No.
But it's, because it's a hard one to answer. But.
Yes, of course. You know, along the way, obviously, there were a variety of people around you who tried to be, you know, helpful to one extent or another, and, you know, and I wonder if you could, you know, talk about a couple of them. I mean, I was very kind of touched in the ways that, for example, you read about Jackson Browne, and, you know, and his involvement in trying to, you know, work things out, you know, for you and Warren, and help you, and also help Warren. Wonder if you could just talk a little bit about him and his role and all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jackson was, we named Jackson the godfather for Ariel when she was born. He had done a lot for us before she was born, during the pregnancy, which was also during the recording of his first album, or his first
The album that
known
people
album.
know, yeah.
And he took it very seriously. He took that very seriously. I mean, you know, a few years ago, he flew to Portugal and married Ariel, you know, was officiated at her wedding. So, and he was always like that. So it was a difficult position he was in, because he was Warren's friend. He was producing his records. He got him his record deal. David Geffen never had a fondness for Warren, and probably doesn't to this day. But Jackson convinced him to sign him. So for Warren, there was this, he had a feeling of indebtedness to Jackson, which
complicated his own relationship too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Jackson was constantly trying to, you know, weigh how to maintain his relationship with Warren and yet sort of take care of us. He took on that role. After Warren and I split up, Jackson was very much in our lives. I mean, it was Jackson who, you know, paid for Ariel's flute lessons, or, you know, did those kinds of things that normally a father would do. Jackson would come to visit. And, but if Warren was in the picture, Jackson just immediately bowed out and stepped out so as to never interfere. He was, you know, he was incredibly sensitive, but it was difficult. I mean, the night that Tenderness on the Block was written, Warren had ripped the banister off the stairway. I mean, you know, it was a long stairway, and he was really drunk. And I called Jackson because I needed help. I couldn't, we were up, the baby and I were upstairs, and I couldn't get down the stairway. And I, you know, I laugh, it's not funny, but it's what happened. And he came over and started writing with Warren. And he had him at the piano for a while. He took us to his house. So we stayed at his house. And then he went back, and they wrote this unbelievable song for Ariel from a line that Jackson had the title, Tenderness on the Block. Warren liked the title, and Warren wrote most of the song. But, you know, so that's that kind of oppositional thing that would always happen, you know, where you couldn't quite, nothing was black and white, you know, nothing was clear. There wasn't like, I should leave now. But then there's this song that shows how much he does think of his daughter, or he does, you know, and he has no memory. He doesn't know the next day how the banister got ripped out of the.
What, you know, after you left Warren, you talk about what your relationship was like with him, you know, during those years.
Well, in the immediate aftermath, it was difficult. He was almost immediately with someone else, and, you know, I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. You know, neither one of us ever remarried. And periodically, Warren had written a song once called Old Girl when we were in Spain, when we left everything behind because he wasn't going to have a career, and we went to Spain where he played guitar and I passed that. And this song was about us growing old, sitting on the front porch and reminiscing about our lives. And it was never recorded because we split up. But periodically, over the years, he would say, well, is it time yet, old girl? As if, you know, and I knew that I could never go back. But there was something there, you know, there was something between us that continued. You know, it's you talk about all the, you know, the tearing banisters off and throwing furniture out on the lawn, or, you know, the hideous scenes that happened. But, you know, we also would play Scrabble, you know, or, you know, him painting the baby's bedroom when I was pregnant, or, you know, there are a lot of other things, of course, that more of those other things that really, than when he got out his .38 Magnum and shot the rats in the garage, you know. I mean, it was, you know, but it was so much, I think, for both of us, really, that relationship, that at the end, you know, it was, I was still the wife. He called me wifey.
I mean, one of the things that also the book revealed that I was not aware of is just the degree of Warren's obsessive-compulsive disorder, some of which, as often is the case with those, I mean, rightly or wrongly, are pretty hilariously funny, and others are, you know, more disturbing. But I wonder if you could, you know, just share a little of that, you know, in terms of the ways that he would respond to certain things, for example, in terms of whether it was bad luck or not.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, when we were together, the term obsessive-compulsive disorder didn't exist, so we didn't know what it was. And, you know, I think initially I thought he was making it up. You know, this was just for attention or for, but then the longer you were with someone, you realize, wait, he really can't step on a crack. You know, I mean, he really won't do that. What was the question?
It was just about the idea of, like, you know, I mean, if a particular billboard that he saw.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, fairly early on in our relationship, we had a meeting on Sunset, and it was to do with him possibly getting a record deal or something, which didn't happen. But it was an important meeting, and we were running late. And we're driving down Sunset Boulevard, and there's a billboard of Uncle Sam Wants You. You know, I mean, it's Vietnam and all of that. And Warren had avoided the draft by going to a psychiatrist and having him say he was gay. And so when Warren did something like that, I mean, it's not Warren, I don't think they would have ever taken him anyway. But he then felt guilty, because then he thought, oh, all of those guys are dying over there, and I'm sitting here pretending I'm someone I'm not. And so to him, then that incident would translate into some ritualistic thing. So if he saw anything to do with the military, he couldn't pass under the billboard. You know, why it was that, I don't know. He couldn't pass under it. And, you know, we were driving in the middle of traffic, so we passed under it. So then you would have to drive back down another street and around the billboard. And on Sunset, it's hard. You have to go up through the hills. Yes. And we were late for a meeting. And then you couldn't just go then to your destination. You had to drive back with it behind you. So, you know, and then you could go back down another street and go to the meeting. So, you know, we ended up being an hour late to that meeting instead of 10 minutes late. But there was no way around it. I mean, you know, he had colors, whatever. He went through different periods. But, you know, like at the end of his life, you know, people could find me. I was listed. So a lot of people called me who didn't know how to reach him. And one of them was Sebel. He had a group called Lime and Sebel, and it was a green period for him. And everything was green glasses, green walls in his apartment, and he named himself Lime. But anyway, Sebel of that group, whose name is not really Sebel, but called me and said, you know, she'd really like to, and I thought, well, that might be someone, you know, most people you kind of field, but I thought he might want to, and I called him and I said, Warren, Violet Santangelo wants to talk to you. And he said, why would I want to talk to anyone associated with the color green? Because his color was gray by that time.
The fabulous story that somebody tells in your book of wandering around in various kind of mall stores, because Warren would only get certain kinds of, was it Calvin Klein
Gray
t-shirts?
Yeah.
And the guy says, because but we just were in the other store and we bought them, and now you want to go to the other store and buy more of them. He goes, when you take them out of the wrapping, he goes, well, Warren said, well, we never got any from the other store. They're different. And he goes, well, what difference does it make when you take them out of the wrapping? You know, the shirt's the same. And he goes, well, I don't take them out of the wrapping. And he would just save up all these shirts.
Which we still have, a lot of them, although we're wearing them.
They're being put to productive use. Obviously, you know, I mean, as many people know, there was Warren got ill, seriously ill, and you know, I wonder if you could talk about learning about that and how it affected you and how it affected him.
Yeah. You know, by the time Warren got sick, he'd been sober for 18 years. I mean, Warren tried for many years to get sober. It was not that he wanted to do a lot of the things that he did, and he had terrible guilt complexes and so on. So I just want to put that in there. And our relationship had gotten very close. So when he was diagnosed, he'd been having shortness of breath and had been calling everybody he knew saying, you know, do you think this is from overexercise? Do you think this is, and feeling dizzy and, you know, just having some odd physical things happen. And he did his career was really at the bottom. And he couldn't even get a solo tour at that point, let alone a record contract. And he was playing with a guy named Matt Kartsonis who did folk festivals. And so they did 2 folk festivals in Canada, and he had to leave the stage because he couldn't, at one point.
Just physically sustain himself during the show,
yeah. Yeah, and so he went to see his dentist because he didn't go to see doctors. And his dentist was a friend, a guy named Stan Goldman, and Stan insisted that he go to a doctor right then from his office. And they took him to a cardiologist because with his mother's history of heart disease and so on, they thought it would be heart. And she sent him right away to, for tests for cancer, and they discovered that day that he had what was diagnosed, I don't remember if it was I think it was diagnosed that day as mesothelioma, which is from asbestos. The first thing, he went home, and he called his children, and he called Jorge Calderon. Our daughter called me. She was about to leave for Portugal and the first time her husband had ever been anywhere out of the country, and it was this big, exciting, he was writing a screenplay, and they were paying for him to go, and so it was a big, exciting adventure for them, and he didn't want to spoil their trip, so he did not say that he knew it was terminal. He said, oh, well, they'll do more tests and so on. But she called me, and what she said to me was, Mom, he went to a doctor. It has to be really bad. And so I called him, and he was in those initial days between being sort of philosophical. Humor was always a part of everything Warren did,
Yes.
up to his last breath, and then getting very serious, and he the first few days it was, what should I do? He talked about, and he was calling me 5 or 6 times a day in the first periods, and he asked me to come out and stay with him when it gets real ugly. And then he said, maybe we should go to India, and I could be burned on a funeral pyre, and you can scatter my ashes in the Ganges. And then he had a girlfriend who was Catholic, and he was always very intrigued by the ritual. He loved ritual. It was the OCD thing. But the idea you could go into a confessional and be absolved of your sins was very appealing to Warren. And so they went to visit her priest, should he become Catholic and be forgiven? And there wasn't enough time, they didn't think at that time. So, he was exploring all these different things, like what do you do? Mitch Albom, who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie, was a friend of his from the Rock Bottom Remainders, and Mitch happened to be out in LA, and he met with him, the guy who knows about death and dying,
Yes.
and, what should I do? Do I die with my boots on, or, And finally, he said, wait a minute, I make music. That's what I do. And he set about writing an album, which at that time we thought he only had 3 months. He lived for a year. And the album it's very personal. The songs on that album, on the album called The Wind, are goodbye songs to different people and different, which those people know who they are, but it also was just a farewell to. And he told his manager, he said, use this. I can't get a gig doing anything else, so use this. I want to leave something. He found out, what really motivated it was when he found out that his business managers had cashed in his insurance policy. He had nothing to leave his children. And that really infuriated him, as it did my father, who made him get the insurance policy in the first place. But so he wanted to leave something for his children and his legacy in music. I mean, he was afraid if he didn't do something. At the very end, he said, when he was living longer than expected, he said, I better hurry up and die so they can nominate me for a Grammy, because he figured they'd never do it if he was alive. They hadn't so far. So, he maintained a sense of humor. He got to see his grandchildren born. My daughter had twin boys. And he said goodbye to everyone. He did drink before he died, which was sad for all of us because we lost a big chunk of time. And it was ugly right away. But he then came around, and he got himself together, and he was at the hospital when those babies were born, and And I think in the end, he came to terms with things. He really made an effort to say goodbye, to make amends to everybody in his life that he felt like that was important to do, with whom he felt that was important to do. And in the end, he'd done the album, he put that away, he didn't look at music again, and made the amends he needed to make with his family. And I think came to a place where, you know, Warren always was attracted to the picket fence. You know, his male best friends were guys who had monogamous relationships and, you know, were so far away from the thing. Were artists, but, you know, were able to maintain this other life that he thought he wasn't capable of. And in the end, I think he found that a little bit.
You know, Warren is also, as part of that legacy, wanted you to be his biographer, and but of course, in the course of doing that, you know, you discovered many things about him that I'm sure you didn't know, and many things about his sexual history and other aspects of his life that I'm sure were difficult for you to learn. I wonder if you could just talk about what that process was like and where you came out at the end of it.
Yeah, Warren, when he was diagnosed in those early conversations, he asked me to write his book. He and his friend Carl Hyacin had talked about it and thought I would be the right one to do it. And he knew I always wanted to be a writer, and somehow I was always with people who were so much more talented and gifted than I felt I was, that I never did it. And so, you know, he saw it in a lot of terms, but I didn't really think about it until he died. And then there I was, having promised that I would do this. And I'm sure he expected a traditional biography. We didn't talk about how it would be, but after toying with that for a very short time, I realized I can't do that. What I'm going to do is start talking to everybody he knew. And there's a book, Edie, about Edie Sedgwick, which is, I think, a fabulous book.
The point, I think, just to interject, is that the book is more of an oral history with, with Crystal weaving in her own observations and setting the emotional tone, but there'll be like a block of text, Jackson Browne speaking, or John Landau speaking, or Bruce Springsteen speaking about Warren. And I think that, just to make clear the distinction that you're making here.
Right. And I had his journals also, so
Yes.
there are also journal entries. So I just started calling people, and I didn't really know how I was going to do it, so I started chronologically. I mean, I actually talked to people he went to kindergarten with, and then I would write narrative as kind of a roadmap, and I had different ideas of how to put it together. In the end, I think it came out as I wanted it to, and the interview process was cathartic. I talked to people I hadn't seen in a million years, people who had been good friends with Warren that I didn't know, who are now good friends of mine. And people really opened up and wanted to open up. He was such an unusual, complex guy, that people wanted to talk about it. It was that part, sort of completed a grieving process for me. But when it came to his journals, his journals were, I mean, frankly, they were mostly boring. His obsessive compulsive thing, he detailed everything. I had this kind of mayonnaise on my sandwich today, and I bought underwear, and the carburetor needs something, whatever. I mean, it was just a lot of that. But he was Warren, so then there'd be these just brilliant zinger lines in there that these literary gems through it, or details of how he came up with a song or something. But I rented a condo, or my parents had a timeshare, and I traded their weeks for a condo in Stowe once, and in Sugarbush once, and just locked myself in and started reading and trying to make notes of the passages that were worth using. And that was really one of the most painful processes I've ever been through. One of the things about doing the book that I discovered, people say, what surprised you the most? And what surprised me the most was the fact that I knew him as well as I did. I realized he knew I knew him probably better than anybody else. That's why he asked me to write the book. But I didn't know the extent. I didn't know the extent of his sexual addiction. I didn't know the extent of his obsessive compulsive stuff, and it was very painful. Warren, sex to Warren was something he believed he had to have, and he had to have it when he needed it right then. But it was like, he had women that he genuinely loved and cared about and had relationships with. And that was one, that was one relationship, but he had women he just dropped in on, like buying a carton of milk. And that's really how much emotional attachment there was to that. It was like a physical need. He didn't think badly of them. And it was stunning. I mean, it was just, I had no idea. That was what I really didn't know. As a wife, when Warren's infidelities with me started after we'd been together for quite some time, after he released records, and as a wife, you're jealous and angry and and he'd say, I tell them that I love you, and that was supposed to make it all right. And I believe he did. After I did this, I realized, that is true. That was.
Yeah, it seems consistent.
Yeah, he'd say, if you go on the road with me, I don't have to do it. But if you don't go on the road with me, then what am I supposed to do? It was like, so it was, but it was interesting.
How did you finally resolve it for yourself, to the degree that you have? I think the end of Warren's life, what became important was that he's at the hospital for those babies, that he's, after they were born, he said to me, we're in the recovery room, and he kind of tugged at my sleeve like a little kid, and he said, come on. I can't tell this without crying. I know where the chapel in this joint is. And we went up to the 10th floor where the chapel was, and the doors were locked. And there was a bench outside, and he said, let's sit down. And we sat down, and we're holding hands, and we're both kind of crying. We just became grandparents. And he said, we made it to the front porch, didn't we, old girl? And, that was it. That was it, that connection of the heart. It was brutal. Yes.
But when you had those moments, they were huge.
Well, Crystal, thank you so much. No, I was wondering,
I haven't done
we
this.
do have a few minutes if anybody had any questions, or we can start the signing, but yes.
I was just curious, the night that Warren tore the banister off and Jackson came and saved the day, he said that they wrote a song together. Was that a blackout episode, and did he remember the next day that he wrote this song?
Well, I think the banister was a blackout, but I think, did he write it in a blackout? I don't think so, because he knew he had the song the next day. But, I don't really know.
I was just wondering if the blackouts were just purely destructive, if there was some creative element that you felt there was in that.
I don't think they were usually creative. Not in general.
Anyone else? Did you have a question? And you.
When Warren first asked you to write the book, what were some of your first initial thoughts?
When he first asked me, well, my first thought was that he wasn't serious or he didn't know what he was saying. He had, he was in the Rock Bottom Remainders. He knew so many famous writers who I figured would all be happy to do it. So I didn't take it seriously the first time, but then he kept revisiting it until he got me to say yes. But, he believed that that's what I would have assumed I would do. And I said, no, Warren, I never would have thought this. I would never
That
have
would be your
thought to do
biographer.
this. And he, but I think at the time, so I said yes. But at the time, we just learned he was dying. And so there's nothing I would have refused him. I mean, he asked me to come live on his pull-out couch when he got really sick, which didn't happen because he started drinking. But I had a life. I had a house and a job and a dog and, but I said yes because I just couldn't say no. And so I think that's probably mostly what it was. And I didn't think about the implications of it too much until he actually died, and then I had the responsibility.
Yes.
Well, after the Rolling Stone cover picture with him spread-eagled by people helping him through rehab, put out an album called Sentimental Hygiene, one of his best albums, I think, where basically it's him and REM. And it sure sounds like he's high. Was he really straightened out and just...
As I said, Warren went through, I don't even know the number, I did know, but maybe 12 treatment centers. He got sober and drank many, many times. So when they were writing the piece, Paul Nelson who wrote that article, became a friend of ours and was, very personally involved in that and in his recovery process in those days. And I think, part of it is Paul wanted him to really be sober, and he was, and he really wanted it, and he really wanted it for all those years. Warren didn't want to keep doing the things that he did, but it's a hard thing to do, especially in that world. I mean, I don't think he would have picked up a drink at the end, except everybody around him. There were people all around him who had never seen him, and they would have liked just one drink with the excitable boy, just one time. So people were, and he was calling me and saying, they'll give me all them Elvis drugs. They'll give me all them Elvis drugs. And I said, Warren, are you in pain? He said, nope, I'm not in any pain. But they'll give them to me. And, and we talked about it. And the first night he drank was the night of our daughter's engagement party. And I think, my theory, is completely subjective, but he left with the woman he'd come with that night, and she had a glass of wine. And he said, I'll have one too. And, that's all it took was, and I think he, at that engagement party, suddenly realized that there were things he was going to miss out on. That's, again, that longing for family, for something, and, that he was getting older and, was worried about his rock and roll career being finished, but then it hit him. There were other things, that he was going to miss out on.
Yes.
You mentioned that Warren often wrote music when he was in extreme emotional states, and I guess his most popular song, "Werewolves in London," I knew that song before I knew who Warren was when I was younger. And it's one of those songs that is like an instantaneous mood lifter. Like as soon as you hear it, you're just in a good mood, whatever. So I'm wondering where he was when he wrote that, because it seems that it's just the quintessential bar song. I mean, maybe he's drunk people like The Howl, or maybe it's this one. So I'm just wondering where he was when he wrote that.
Well, the story of that song's kind of been well documented. It was a song that's co-written with Roy Marinell and Waddy Wachtel, the guy who was my boyfriend. And we were in, Phil Everly was a friend, and Warren had worked with him, and he called Warren up one morning and said he'd been up watching late night TV, which he did a lot, and saw this old English movie, Werewolf of London. And he said, I got it, you've got to start a dance craze. I mean, it wasn't Phil's thing, but he thought that's perfect for Warren. And, you know, the dance will be called Werewolves of London, and so go write the song. So we were going down to our friend Roy's in Venice, and Roy had this guitar lick, dun 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 dun, and Warren said, you know, we've got to write this song, and so they started working on it. Waddy was on his way to a session and stopped by. He said, you mean like "Ahoo"? And then Waddy kind of rattled off the first verse. I think it's Warren's second verse, and Roy's third verse. I can't remember the order, but you know that they just, and it happened in 15 minutes. And I wrote it. I used to carry a steno pad with me. I still do, to write down things that would happen, because it was often that, you know, some lyric or something would happen and nobody would remember it. So I wrote it all down. And none of them thought it was a song. So really, you have me to thank, or not. And some days later, we were in the studio with Jackson, and I said, play your new song. And he said, what new song? I said, Werewolves of London. And I got out the steno pad, and he played the song. And Jackson took it seriously. And there's a recording of Jackson doing a not exactly correct version of it at Bryn Mawr, I think, after that. And so it was a song that became his signature song, not what he would have necessarily chosen as a signature song. But he was always grateful for that, too. So.
Yes.
Did Warren have much of a relationship with his father?
Yeah. Warren went to live with his father when he was in junior high. His parents were on and off until they were off altogether. And, you know, his father was a Russian immigrant Jew who had grown up in the garment district with his father had a cart and sold underwear in Brooklyn, Warren's grandfather. And his father was much older than him. Warren's father and Warren's grandmother on his mother's side were the same age. And he was this gruff old guy that adored Warren. But, you know, if he was a gambler, and if he was winning, he'd buy Warren, before he had a driver's license, an XKE. And if he was losing, he'd kick him out on the street. So it was and, you know, the way he knew to show affection was to hand him a couple crisp $100 bills. So it was a difficult relationship, but yeah, you know, I mean, it's like when Warren and I got together, he'd say, oh, Dad called, I got to go meet him at the steam bath, and that, you know, and going to meet him at the steam bath, he'd always, you know, that's when they'd have their father-son bonding, and he'd give him a couple $100, and that was that. But, you know.
You have one more, or? Yeah. Go ahead. You started it, so.
Yeah, I just talk a lot about Warren. Crystal, I'm wondering, you have a connection to Vermont? You can talk about that.
My connection to Vermont? I followed a boyfriend here in 1967 when I graduated from high school. I ended up, Waddy Wachtel's band was the house band at the Bluetooth in Sugarbush, and I was working there. And a year later, we ended up in California. I didn't come back to Vermont until my daughter went to school here. She went to Marlborough College. And we all kind of fell back in love with Vermont. Although I live in Barrie, and I have moments of doubt.
Well, Crystal, thank you so much. We all appreciate your honesty and openness. And Crystal will be signing books, and so thank you all for coming. So.